Hello everyone, really good to be with you and to talk with you today more about 2 Timothy. Are you familiar with Chinese whispers, where someone sends a message around a group in a circle in a whisper, and by the time the message gets to the last person it's completely garbled? Well, this might make more sense by the end of our session today. Paul is continuing to instruct Timothy in leading the church in Ephesus, and today we're hearing about a real contrast between the person who is God's worker and the person who is a false teacher. We've heard a bit about this before, and then Paul is unpacking it further. These words to us are not just to Timothy, but they are to every believer, and that includes us. So whilst Paul was instructing Timothy, we benefit hugely from hearing what he has to say. Let's have a look. Paul explains what God's worker is like in chapter 2, verses 14 to 26. He says, "Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth." Now, this might sound terrifying for us, but God helps us to do this. And he encourages us in verse 24 to pursue righteousness, faith, love and peace. Paul unpacks it a bit further by saying that this looks like showing kindness to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, and correcting opponents with gentleness. We know that God has accepted us in Jesus, so we have no need to be ashamed, nor to run away from serving God and trying to grow his kingdom. So we need to keep growing in knowing God, following him, and we grow in righteousness, faith, love and peace. Easy words, hard to do. So let's encourage each other in this. We need to be ready for every good work, that is God's good work, and we'll see this later in next week's session. So as we read the Bible, we need to try and understand it and live it out and apply it to our lives. We need to know what it does say and what it doesn't say. It's important that we listen critically to any Bible teaching, so in church, on YouTube, anywhere else, listening to me today. Do you agree or not with what the speaker says the passage means? You may be right and I may be wrong. Just because someone is a pastor doesn't mean that they have always understood the passage correctly. The challenge in this passage is that we need to ask God to work in us and through us in prayer to help bring others to know him. He does that work. We just need to be faithful in sharing the good news with people, and then to keep growing in God. And we need to keep looking for ways to do this and take initiative. Now Paul gives a great contrast. The people who are not God's worker, but those who are false teachers. Instead of seeking to grow in God and rightly handling the word of truth, Paul says false teachers quarrel with words and babble. This leads people to the opposite of being a good worker, to ungodliness. So they fight with words, they teach heresy, they teach things against the true things of Jesus. These arguments produce nothing useful. They're just a complete waste of time. They work on our fear. They speak about superstition and rumour, gossip and untruths. And we can be derailed by this ourselves, and we can take others with us. So they impact newer or not so new believers, influenced by the personality and words of these false teachers to accept things which ruin our faith. Paul uses a very stark example in verse 17. He says, false teachers' talk is like gangrene. It's hard to stop. It infects the thing that it's in, a limb usually, and it makes it completely useless. So in the end, it can be deadly. And we see that Hymenaeus and Philetus in verse 17, who are also mentioned in 1 Timothy 1, have swerved from the truth, saying the resurrection has already happened. Swerve is actually used 3 times in Timothy. The idea comes from archery, of an arrow that's shot wide of the truth, that is, of the good news. Can you think of a person you know who's been derailed from their faith by someone who kept telling them things that are not true about Jesus? None of this builds up the church. Instead, Paul says, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. So we know we're approved by God. And then Paul warns Timothy that in times of difficulty in these last days, that is, after the Old Testament period and in Jesus' day and from now until Jesus returns, we know there'll be much persecution. his words are, he says that the people who are false teachers have the appearance of godliness, but they deny its power. They are always learning and never able to arrive at a knowledge of the truth. So, 3 very quick applications. Paul says to Timothy, very simply, live God's way, don't get diverted from it. That's to us too. Secondly, look for ways God can work in and through you to bring others to know him and to grow. We are all part of the body of Christ, and we grow the church and we seek to grow God's kingdom. This is a big challenge, so we need to seek to be kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently endure evil, and correct opponents with gentleness. And then lastly, avoid quarrels and controversy, so that we don't fall away, nor do we influence anyone else too. Paul was so aware that the good news needed to be passed without corruption, as happens in Chinese whispers. His great concern, therefore, was that the truth is taught so that the baton can be passed on from one generation to the next. So that's 2,000 years ago. It's come to us today, truthfully. How amazing is that? We're so thankful to God. Have a great time together as you dig into your study. Thank you.